introduce our moderator and panel this afternoon to thank Thought Exchange for helping sponsor this event. Heidi Baker, there you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're super happy to be here. This is our first year of the conference, and we're just loving it. And first of all, I just want to thank all of you for the leadership roles you play and the support you give to the board members. Everybody here, thank you for what you do for our children. We really appreciate it and honor you. So we're happy to be sponsors of this town hall meeting today. And Thought Exchange, we left a little brochure on all the seats if you want to read about it, but Thought Exchange is an online browser-based platform that allows leaders to crowdsource your stakeholders in a different way than you've ever imagined. So rather than a Likert survey that we're all used to, we're able to crowdsource your stakeholders, whether it's your community, your employees, your children. We're able to crowdsource and help you learn what people are really thinking in real time. So people are able to go online, share their thought, rate the thoughts of others, and then see what emerges. So all people are heard, all voices are heard, all languages, all walks of life, rather than only hearing from the loud. So our little motto is, we take it from the loud to the crowd. So rather than hearing from those same people all the time, we allow you to hear from everyone in your community, in your workplace, and amongst your children. So that's basically what we do. And my colleague Eric is back here, so if any of you like to speak to either one of us afterwards to learn more, we're going to be around till tomorrow, so we'd love to meet you, and thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Thought Exchange. I'm going to wait to get the signal from Tanya. So, because this is going to be live streamed nationally. So I'm going to introduce our moderator this afternoon, and he will introduce our panel. Our moderator this afternoon is Hansi Lo Wang, is a national correspondent with NPR, National Public Radio, based in New York City. Wang covers the people, power, and money behind the 2020 census for NPR's Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Weekend Edition, hourly newscasts in NPR.org. This year, Wang was honored with the Excellence in Statistical Reporting Award from the American Statistical Association for covering census participation and the legal battle over the now blocked Citizenship Question that you may remember that the Council of the Great City Schools and others. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hansi Lo Wang. Hansi?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
How are we doing? I'm just joining you from New York City, so I haven't been with you, so I hope your conference has been going well. We are here to talk about the census. I hope you know what you're in for. We'll be here till 4 o'clock, and the point of today is to answer your questions, to have a robust discussion. We are going to actually be passing around note cards as we're talking. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, we will have mics up here. We'll get live questions, but if you want a question, you want to write down a question, note cards will be coming around. We'll collect those, just so you know. But we are going to talk about the census, and this is what I cover. And so a lot of times when I tell people, this is my beat, this is what I do full time, report on the census. They're like, really? Is there really that much to cover about the census? And I would say that when you're talking about the census, thing to keep in mind, what we're really talking about people, about power, we're talking about money. That's what we're really talking about when we're talking about the census, which sounds like a bureaucratic, boring, dull word that you don't want to touch, you don't want to think about, let alone every 10 years. This is in our Constitution. This is something that actually is mentioned in the Constitution before voting, before any mention of a president. The Constitution talks about a census. You won't see the word census in the Constitution. It's referred to as an actual enumeration. Article 1, Section 2 calls for an actual enumeration every 10 years. And this is how the framers of the Constitution decided we're going to essentially establish our government. How do we establish our democracy, our representative democracy? It's based on the number of people living in the country. It wasn't always that way. If we go back to the original language of the Constitution, we'll see language about counting some people as 3/5 of a person, enslaved people. We will see language that says excluding Indians not taxed. But if we remember our American history class, after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment was passed. And by the 1940 census, the Census Bureau had concluded that Indians not taxed no longer applied to any Native Americans living in the United States. And so by the 1940 census, every person living in the country was counted for the census in order to come up with numbers that determine how we form our representative democracy, specifically how we divide up the seats in the House of Representatives among the states. And those numbers are related to the Electoral College, how many votes each state gets when it comes to the presidential election. It's based on census results. Not to mention, what's the money part? An estimated $880 billion a year in federal funding for schools, for roads, for Medicare, for Medicaid, for other public services, guided by census results. It's also used by businesses to determine where we build our next supermarket, where we need another elementary school. This forms the basis of our reality, and we have one shot at this every 10 years. There are no do-overs. So this is a big deal. We have a dynamite panel here today, lots of experience to talk about what it's like to be in the field, on the ground, to try to get people to think about the census, to consider participating in the census. We have current and former Census Bureau employees on this stage. We have school administrators on the stage. It's going to be, I hope, a really robust discussion. So let me quickly take a look at my notes. I'll introduce our panelists from the very end. From Philadelphia, my hometown, we have the Chief of Staff to the Superintendent of the Philadelphia School District, also the Chief Talent Officer, Naomi White. How are you, Naomi? Doing well. Tell me, what's going on in Philadelphia? I was just there last month, and I know the city launched this campaign trying to train up Philly champion or census champions. Is that what they're called?
Yes, we've got Census and our program called Philly Counts. And we've been busy, not as long as I've heard from some other cities, getting organized for the census, but for about the last 6 months have been heavily involved in creating a number of subcommittees around the groups that we anticipate will be the hardest to count. And we've also then, as the district, we are the head of the Children and Youth Subcommittee, and we've been doing a lot of work around figuring out how to best engage our teachers, principals, and others to be primary messengers, since they hold a place of trust often with our families and will be the best to deliver messages, especially to those that we know might be reticent, anxious, or even frightened to participate in the census. So we've been busy with that, and also thinking about ways to even engage our students as census champions as part of the work as well.
Yeah. And to give you a sense for folks how big the school district is, so you have about 127,000 students K through 12, is that right?
Sure, the district has 127,000 students. We have another 80,000 charter students. So there are about a little over 200,000 students in public schools in Philadelphia. So we have a large number of folks that we need to make sure get counted. Philadelphia gets about $3 billion as a result of the census, so it's incredibly important to us.
Thank you, welcome.
Thank you.
To the right of Naomi, we have Debbie Stein. Debbie is the first leader of the Partnership for America's Children. Tell me, what is the Partnership for America's Children?
Oh, good, that's on. The partnership is a network of multi-issue child advocacy organizations that work primarily at the state, or in some cases, the local level, to improve policies that involve, affect the lives of children. And 31 of them are also the Kids Count grantee in their state. So we use census data in our work a lot, even the ones that are not Kids Count grantees. And because they also, they advocate for kids, they lobby for kids, they understand how important the data is in getting funding in that supports children's lives. And we are serving as the leader of the Count All Kids initiative, which is the initiative to try and make sure we count all young children in the census. And I say young children, meaning primarily children under 5, which were the single biggest group missed by far in the 2010 census, because we missed 1 out of 10 young children. We missed over 2 million young children. And that's a problem that's been getting worse for 40 years. So unless we pay particular attention to counting young children, it's just going to get worse in 2020. And I'm really excited to let you know that we've been able to do some research about why they're missed. We know that a lot of them are missed when their families respond to the census and leave them off. And we've done a little bit of research that tells us why. And we found some messages that persuade families that they should respond and should count their young kids.
Right. I would definitely want to come back to some of the results you got from your survey, those focus groups. But let's move on to the right of Debbie. We have Antonio Placencia from the Los Angeles Unified School District, a very big school district.
Somewhat, yes.
By my count, more than 500,000 students,
Correct.
and predominantly Latinx.
Absolutely. At Los Angeles Unified, diversity is our strength. And since 2016, just seeing the sentiments nationally around our civil liberties, we have been organizing a collaborative that includes all offices within the Los Angeles Unified. And we sort of calibrate and assess what the sentiments in the field are for our families. And since 2016, we initiated a campaign called We Are One LA Unified. At that point, it was standing with immigrant families. And in 2019, with the initiative of Census launching, it will be evolving to We Are One, Make Los Angeles Unified Count. And that will essentially be our spearhead civil rights, Know Your Rights campaign. We have been, I would say, in California, champions in our readiness to activate our efforts around the census. We have acknowledged that we have 60,000 employees that are, it's very important that we provide talking points to around encouraging families to be informing our communities about the census through an informational context. We know that as educators, oftentimes the legal conversations about public charge, about the question, it puts us in a very difficult situation, but we have found a way to work with our legal team to provide our families and our employees the information that is necessary. Our campaign includes a workshop model that we have organized with our community partners. Oftentimes, as large bureaucracies, our partners have a difficult time. But with Lisette's colleagues from NALEO, we have been working for more than a year now, talking about census to families. We have a folder that we provide for families that include a family preparedness plan for our immigrant families. We talk about the importance of being accounted for, and that conversation for new Americans, what does it mean to be civically engaged in your school communities? Why is it important for you to be engaged in Census 2020? So we have already been out in the field talking to families about census. Families this semester at the LA Unified will be getting new posters, banners, materials that we have been using through our grant funding, but we're very blessed this year because we are going to be receiving not only philanthropic dollars, but our amazing governor is also providing school system leaders with funding from the state of California, which is around $2,000 per school in our hard to count communities to execute census efforts. So this year we're going to go big and bold, having liaisons that are going to be providing workshops and awareness materials within those hard to count communities. And we are very blessed as well that we have about 550 parent and family centers. And of those, 51% have technology, Chromebooks. And those are very important because families are very worried about using their cell phones because of the fear that this current presidential administration might be able to track them. So we're going to be working to prepare our parent and family center staff in our schools to build a safe space within our school communities to use their Chromebooks, textbooks, whatever, Chromebooks, technology to be able to complete the census questionnaire. And the lastly is that we've been working closely as well with the U.S. Census Bureau because they've already told us when our families will be receiving postcards, notifications. So we have messaging, that Blackboard calls, text messages, emails that we can send to families. So we will be essentially coordinating the message right before those items go out, encouraging families, complete your questionnaire, because then that will essentially keep someone from the U.S. Census Bureau from knocking on your door if you don't want a federal agent coming to your door, right? That's just a little bit about some of the work we've been doing at LA Unified, and we're very excited to get the work going in March.
Thank you, Antonio. We'll come back to talk a little bit more about what's going on in LA, but I also want to talk about what's going on in Cleveland. We have Trent Mosley. How are you?
How you doing?
Doing well. I understand your city has also been jumping ahead of the game and getting a head start on outreach.
Yes, so we actually began this work around 2018, just making sure that we get off to a great start and making sure that we are properly prepared to launch into this major initiative that all of us are embarked on. And so in the very beginning, we broke this work down into two camps, two phases: strategic positioning and tactical operational alignment. The first one, under strategic positioning, what was housed underneath there are 4 phases. One, the educational space, where we brought 85 of our industry experts in from around the city of Cleveland and got together and began to think about what are the things that we need to know as the leaders in this work so that when we go out, we are prepared to engage with our families. The second piece was around the awareness, making sure that we put around, which will begin around January, where we begin to launch TV ads, radio spots, to keep the parents informed about what's taking place and all of our stakeholders involved. The third phase, which is the most important for us right now, is the motivational phase, where we have the activities, and I'll talk a little bit more about that from the tactical side of it, where we're looking at the tactics or the strategic activities we're going to do to go out into the community to make sure that our families are involved and making sure we're making those personalized connections. So when we come to their front doors, they understand that we're not only coming with information, but we're coming from a relationship standpoint that we built with you over time, so that way you trust what we say. And then the final piece is around, at the very end, when we look at reaffirming and going back out and checking to make sure that we have everybody on board and have completed as many of those information cards as possible. Then on the tactical side of the house, where we look at going from the global, the vision, to now the small pieces that make up the whole part, is looking at integrating those different industries who have come together and meet as a team and say, okay, what are you doing? So for example, in Cleveland, our Cleveland libraries will have speakers going out to speak with families, as well as utilizing their computer systems for families to come in and utilize those resources. Then we have Cleveland Metropolitan School District, which is us. We'll take advantage of all those multiple touch points that we have within our district, such as parent-teacher conferences, IVRs. We also just learned that just through our monthly interactions that we're having, that we can now bring in like Ancestry.com to actually do presentations. And we've learned that that is a launch point to get families interested. Not once they learn their history, begin to look at how can we merge it with what's being asked on the census. And so we just had that conversation last month, so we're excited.
Great. I should mention Trent Mosley is the Chief of Engagement at the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. To the right of Trent, we have Jerry Green from the Urban League, National Urban League, consultant, but also a former Census Bureau employee. How many years did you work at the Census Bureau, may I ask?
I worked there for 20 years, Hansi, in communications and outreach to historically undercounted populations.
Great. And what are you working on now at the National Urban League, now that you've left the Bureau?
Well, I wouldn't be
And
true.
Jerry, I'm going to ask me to move the mic a little bit closer.
Sure. I wouldn't be
Bend
true.
it down.
Sure.
There you go.
I wouldn't be, I have to represent Washington, D.C. for a moment. How about those gnats? So we can start there. But, the Urban League, really going back to your question, I'm wearing a badge here. It says Make Black Count. This badge, this logo and this raised fist with the pencil is 50 years old. So that's how long the Urban League has been advocating for an accurate count for the Black community. And so we just reprised this logo and the slogan because that's the name of our campaign for the 2020 census. For the last 2 years, the Urban League has been holding workshops across the country, engaging people where they are in local communities, working with state and local officials to talk about the importance of the census and the implications of a Black undercount, which are serious. We've developed a toolkit, and I provided a link to that toolkit. Hopefully you'll be able to look at our toolkit that we've developed for the 90 affiliates that we have across 36 states. We've provided information to help them understand some of the intricacies of the census and how they can communicate to their constituents about the importance of the census. Just just a couple of days ago, we had a national teleconference on the 2020 census where we had Stacey Abrams on the call, Reverend Al Sharpton, we had Derek Johnson, the CEO of the NAACP, and we had Congressional Black Caucus members, and we had about more than 1,000, we had about 1,200 people from all over the country calling in to find out what they need to know about the census and what those critical issues are and how important it is. And finally, we've developed a 2020 Census Black Roundtable comprised of national organizations, thought leaders, where we could get together and talk about strategies to reach the most vulnerable undercounted populations in our community. So we're reaching out to Black immigrants. We're working with the National Association of Black Just Immigration, the National Alliance for Black Immigration. And we are working with not just on Black immigrants, but we're interested in, of course, all of those people who are coming, the formerly incarcerated individuals, who are coming back to our communities in great numbers. It's very critical that we embrace them and make them a part, help them understand that they're important and their voice matters. And of course, the undercount of children. While there was 1 in 10 kids who under 4 were in our population, 6 out of 10 children were Black and brown children were undercounted. So we're looking at all those issues, Hansi, and it's just a pleasure to be here to talk with you all about it.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
To the right of Jerry, we have Lizette Escobedo from the NALEO, National, I always have to say this on the radio, now I forget, I'm blanking. National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. How did I do, Lizette?
You did well. National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, Educational Fund.
Thank you. What are you doing at the NALEO?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes?
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if it was on or not. So I do a lot of everything, but all related to census. We've been pretty much traveling all across the country, not only to educate and inform people around the census that are part of our community, but as we know, Latinos are kind of spread throughout every community. So I was just telling Deb, we were together in Missouri, and I never thought in working on the 2010 census with NALEO, which I did 10 years ago and I came back, that I would be going to Missouri, Kentucky, Alabama. But Latinos are everywhere, especially when you look at Latino immigrants and kind of how they come into various receiving cities and states. So a lot of our focus has been on education and information as it pertains to misinformation and disinformation. Within our community, I think we have a huge undertaking. As you all know, it is no secret to anyone that this has probably been one of the most anti-immigrant, anti-Latino administrations that we've seen. And so our community is fearful. And this doesn't just go for undocumented immigrants or immigrants in general. Based on our research, it actually goes for mixed status families. It goes for families like mine, where my grandma's a legal permanent resident and a green card holder. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is making sure that we, one, inform our community that the citizenship question will no longer be on the census. 2, that their data is safe and confidential. 3, that the information will not be used to target them or for any type of ICE raid, since we're seeing that in the community. We launched our campaign about a year ago called Hágase Contar, which is this cool little button, which there should be some buttons floating somewhere for you all. I don't know if we have enough, but we'll have some. And we launched this effort, again, to get out into the community and inform them first about this, about the important aspects that I mentioned. We do this through a couple of ways. One is Spanish language media. We have a national partnership with Univision, Entravisión, Telemundo, and a lot of your local radio stations. So if I'm not traveling, I'm in one of the studios. And then we also do this through our bilingual hotline, which is 877 El Censo. If you all get access to the PowerPoint, it'll have that information in there as well. The set launch date for 877 El Censo was January of 2020. And so I started with Naleo in January of 2019. And when we saw all of the misinformation that was going around in terms of the citizenship question, we thought there's no way that we can leave our community with unanswered questions from now until January. So a lot of the work that I did on kind of my first few months was launch our national bilingual hotline in June of 2019. So this is an active hotline. We have about 12 hotline operators that speak English and Spanish, fully trained, that can provide folks all of the information they need. Another thing that we're preparing for is similar to election protection, where folks can kind of call in and report any anomalies that they see. We're preparing for census protection, making sure that there aren't folks in the community giving our community members and our immigrants wrong information, and by way of that, not making themselves count. So we're going to have a reporting structure that we've kind of put in place. The other kind of piece of our work is our HágaseContar.org campaign. We've developed various toolkits, materials. We just saw the need to get in front of the community a lot sooner than the communications plan from the Bureau. And so we developed as much as we could. Half of my time goes to content creation. The other 25% goes to travel and presentation, and the other 25% goes to Spanish language media and informing our communities. Aside from that, we do have a field presence. Thankfully, in California, which is has one of your largest Latino hard-to-count communities, and some of the counties with the largest Latino hard-to-count communities, in California, we did receive a good amount of funding. As you all know, in California, the governor passed $187 million towards census, which we compared to Texas, which is 0, and Florida, 0. And so, so we have a huge undertaking, specifically within the Latino community in California. We've hired in Inland Empire, San Diego, Central Valley. We've also hired in, I'm forgetting another one, Orange County and LA. And then we also have a field presence in Florida, Texas, North Carolina, New York, and Arizona. And so in addition to that, we're helping the organizations with a full Train the Trainer curriculum that we're launching in January. So we're doing as much as we can to, again, get in front of this. But in terms of the challenges for the Latino community, this is going to be a huge fight. But for us, this is really the civil rights fight of our time. There has been a huge effort to make sure that Latinos aren't counted this census, and that they're left off, and that they're made invisible. And so our job is, in everything we create and everything we do as Naleo, is to make sure that they're seen, heard, and counted on this particular census.
Thank you, Lisette. And last but not least, we have a current representative of the U.S. Census Bureau, Michelle Ellison. How are you, Michelle?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. You are a partnership specialist, and I was talking to the former chief operating officer of the 2010 census, and he described the Partnership Specialist Program, which sounds really bureaucratic and dull and boring, right? Partnership Specialist, this source told me, is a secret weapon of getting every group counted in the country. This was a program started to make sure that groups that the Bureau considers hard to count, that there is specific outreach and partnerships. Correct, Michelle?
Yes, so I am the partnership coordinator for the state of Kentucky. We have a team of about 17 partnership specialists across the state, and our role is to reach out to elected officials, to businesses, nonprofit organizations, schools, trusted voices in the community, and work with them to form what are called complete count committees. We need to establish a complete count committee in every county across the nation. We need local folks that can help localize the message, help folks understand what's in it for me. Why do I want to take 10 minutes to respond to the census? Why does it matter? This is my third decennial census. I started back in 2000, and I served as a partnership specialist in 2010. And I really have had 10 years to think about what we didn't do right in 2010 and what we need to focus on to really ensure success in 2020. And I think one of the biggest things that we can focus on is partnering with our schools, partnering with our teachers. Our teachers really are the trusted voice in the community. There are plenty of folks out there that they're not going to complete their census because they see a commercial on TV, and there will be lots of commercials on TV. They're not going to do it because their governor tells them to or their mayor tells them to. But they just might do it if their child's teacher reaches out to them and explains how important it is to their education for the next 10 years. So that's what we try to do. We try to bring those folks together around the table, work with them, and provide them the resources they need to get the message out across the nation that the census is safe, it's easy, and it's so important to complete.
Thank you, Michelle. This reminds me, this is a very common question I ask people when I do interviews about the census. How many decennials do you have under your belt? How many censuses have you done? And so, Michelle, you have 3. Jerry, how many have you?
Well, I left the Census Bureau in 2017, so this will be my third one.
Third. Let's get a sense of the room. So I'm going to count out numbers. Raise your hand if you've been involved, not necessarily just participate, but been involved in outreach efforts. So 1 decennial, 1 census. Okay? Keep them up if you've done it for 2 censuses, 3. Okay. So 2.
1.
Two's the next. Okay. Did I miss anyone? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so 3. Do we have 3? 3 going once. We have 4.
We have
4. Okay. Do we have 5? 5. I'm sorry. How many? 4. Okay. Anyone higher than 4? 1970.
Nice.
Wow. So there is a lot of expertise, not just on the stage here today, but also in the room. Let's get started with the conversation let's talk about the citizenship question. I spent most of my time the past few months talking about reporting on the legal battle over the citizenship question. So in a nutshell, if you haven't been following the news, there will not be a citizenship question on the 2020 census forms. This question would have asked, is this person a citizen of the United States? It was a question that was worded not to get at immigration status. It was about U.S. citizenship status. This was a proposal by the Trump administration, and multiple courts blocked it from being added. And at this point, the Trump administration has backed down from pushing to get that question onto the forms. However, it is still moving forward with another way, an alternative way of producing detailed citizenship information about the citizenship status of every person living in the country. The administration has directed the Census Bureau to collect government records from Department of Homeland Security, State Department, other federal agencies, and right now there are also requests out to state driver's license records from different DMVs. As far as I know, no states have agreed. It has to be a voluntary sharing agreement of that data, but again, the Census Bureau is trying to produce citizenship information based on these records. But no question, I've done some reporting about even without the question, because this is a legal battle that has lasted more than a year, that it has drummed up a lot of fear, concerns, questions, misinformation, some disinformation about who should be counted. Will this question be on there? Some people still can't keep it straight because there's so much going on right now in the news cycle. I wonder right now, just panelists, what is your sense right now? It's been a few months since the Supreme Court made its ruling at the end of June, and the Trump administration, at the very beginning of July, officially announced it was standing down on this question, kind of put this to bed in terms of the question. What is your sense in your communities? How are people thinking about, are people still talking about the question? Lisette?
So you're right in that the damage has been done. Right. So right now we have in the field a national survey. I just saw the top lines yesterday. My researcher is going to get very mad that I'm sharing this, but we did do a national survey of your kind of full demographics of Latinos. Born here, foreign born, undocumented, documented. We did an oversample of undocumented. There's still an overwhelming amount of folks who believe that the Citizenship Question will be on. There's still an overwhelming amount of folks who believe that undocumented folks in their household should not, in fact, be counted in the census. So there's still a lot of work to be done. A lot of the damage is there. It's really up to us to educate those folks. On the other end, a lot of the rhetoric that we're seeing, and I was talking to Hansi about a Reddit AMA that we did, a Reddit town hall, where a lot of these folks weren't from the immigrant community, right? They were just kind of your folks who are on Reddit. And their whole conversation was also around this sense that undocumented folks should not be counted because they don't vote. And so therefore they should not be taken into consideration for reapportionment. And so I had never had to reference the Constitution so much in a Reddit town hall, to be honest. But there's still kind of that overwhelming feeling of they shouldn't be counted from one end. And in our community, they feel the sense that, hey, am I supposed to be counted or not? So a lot of the damage is there. Unfortunately, there will more than likely be an undercount in our community, but it really is up to us to be the trusted voices to say, one, your information is confidential and secure. Two, everyone needs to get counted because, like Hansi mentioned, this is an issue of power, politics, and money into our community. If you're not counted, your kids don't get the services. If you're not counted, you don't get the political power that our communities need. Interestingly, the same research showed as I'll ask this as a question. Who do you all think were some of the most trusted messengers in the Latino community to get the message out? Anyone?
The church.
Teachers.
Teachers are amongst the most trusted messengers in our community. So I can go on Univision and tell people no tengan miedo, right? Don't have fear, etc. But if a teacher sends a note home with that son or daughter that says, hey, if you have questions, feel free to ask me, or make sure you, out of fear, you don't stay off, right? That you fill out the form. It carries so much more weight. I mean, even myself is growing up, you get the chancla when the teacher says that you didn't do your homework, So it's really, really important that as teachers and educators, you all understand that you play probably even a bigger role than we do. Another key trusted messenger in the Latino community are family members. Specifically, someone here mentioned women. Women in the Latino household tend to be the folks who get the entire household to vote and that get the entire household to fill out that census form. So again, it's how we tap into family members, how we tap into trusted messengers. But there is general misconception in our community. There is general fear of what will happen with this information. We saw news stories on this issue of the DMV. This is a lot of the questions that we've been getting out in the field from our organizers. And so part of our role has been, look, the state has to opt in. This is not a for sure thing. Maybe part of your legislative lobbying at the state level is to talk to your state legislators and your governor about not sharing this information. But we have, it's not just census for the Latino community, it's almost talking about immigration, social justice, civic engagement. How do you talk about all of those and make folks trust you and bring them into the census? So the damage has been done. It isn't something that we can do in silos. We really have to partner on this effort, but we got a long road ahead and a lot of work ahead of us.
Thank you, Lisa. And when I get to Debbie, when I get to Jerry, but first I want to just get to Michelle real quick, just to fact check, because again, there's a lot of just misinformation, a lot of confusion. So a very basic question: who should be counted for the census? The Constitution is supposed to count every person living in the country, but there are people in special circumstances. So just to be very clear, Michelle, undocumented immigrants who are living in the United States, should they be counted in the census?
Yeah, we count everybody who lives here, and we always have since the first census in 1790. And the main reason for that, if you guys think about it, that census has a lot to do with resources. Regardless if you're documented or not, you're still driving on the roads. You're still shopping in the stores. You know, if there is an emergency, a tornado, an ice storm, you are going to be affected by that. So we really do want to count every single person that is living in the United States to make sure that we're planning for the future. And that's especially true with schools. When I talk to superintendents tell me all the time, I can tell you exactly how many students are in my district because I know how many students we serve, and our numbers are different than your Census Bureau numbers. And the problem is they're probably right, but it's our numbers, our Census Bureau numbers, that are used to determine the funding that are coming into those schools for the next 10 years, for the next decade. So it is vitally important that we count every single person that lives in the United States.
And I just want to give some context. There is currently an ongoing lawsuit that I'm tracking in the state of Alabama, filed by the state of Alabama. It is a legal argument against the Trump administration and the Census Bureau, arguing that specifically for the count, the census count used to determine apportionment, used to determine how many seats in Congress each state gets, the state of Alabama, and Congressman Mo Brooks, Republican from Alabama, is suing to get undocumented immigrants excluded from that count. They're saying everyone should be counted, but their argument is that undocumented immigrants should not be included in the count used to determine congressional seats. Just to give you some context there. Debbie, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we did some research. We actually did what, as far as I can tell, is the first ever research on young children and the census. And we did 13 focus groups, and then we did an online survey with families with young children making less than $50,000 a year. And I'll talk a lot about their findings, but the one that's relevant to this question is, first of all, I think there's no question that immigrants are afraid, and it is not just the undocumented, because the whole political environment, the public charge rule, which is targeted at the documented, the border issues. In our focus groups, people said they wouldn't count their young child because they were afraid someone would come and take their young child away. They were not living on the border, but they were still afraid. The good news is that our survey found one message that really made people more comfortable filling out the census, and that is that if you talk about confidentiality, not just by saying that the census has this most strict confidentiality protections of any federal law, which is true, that's not actually that persuasive. But if you tell them what the penalties are, which is that any census employee, current or retired, for their whole lives, who releases individual information faces up to 5 years in prison or up to $250,000 fine, people feel better. And I can see faces in the audience that show why, right? That's really significant. People who think, I don't know how big a deal that confidentiality is, when they think about that, they feel much more confident that their information will not be released. That's critically important for our immigrant communities. We also know that we lose a lot of young children in the count because people are afraid their information is going to go out to private individuals, particularly landlords for families living in overcrowded housing. So it is important to convey how rigid, how strong those confidentiality protections are for a wide range of reasons to persuade families to fill out the census.
And to be very clear, the Census Bureau is prohibited from releasing information identifying individuals. However, the Census Bureau does regularly release information, anonymized information about specific demographic groups down to the neighborhood level, but it would not identify Joe Smith lives at this block,
Right.
as this many people living with him, for example.
For 72 years. People will sometimes ask you, but I can see that I can track my ancestors in the census. The data is confidential for 72 years, and then the Bureau can release it.
If you've ever done family history research, look back at your family tree, you can actually see where your great-grandparents lived, who were their neighbors. That's because of that 72-year rule. Jerry, you wanted to add something?
I do. the Black immigrant population is very important to the 2020 census count. If we don't count Africans and Caribbeans, we're not going to have a complete count because their populations are growing at a quicker rate than those of us who were born in our native, this is the land that we were born in. And so to that extent, the Urban League has incorporated the Institute for Caribbean Studies, the Haitian Roundtable, and the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. I kind of botched Raji's name earlier. But it's critical if you have members in your family who are from the Caribbean or other areas of the Black diaspora, your neighbors, it is important to tell them that it's safe. The Census Bureau has conducted research that showed that African Americans in the Black population really have a greater sense of fear of reprisal when participating in the census. And the Pew Research Institute just published research studies last week that said that Black and Latino populations, out of a survey, that a significant portion, over 25%, said they would probably not or definitely not participate in the census. So this is a very important matter for our population. We have found in having workshops across the country in vulnerable populations that the whole trigger of, hey, you're gonna get $800 billion worth of services doesn't motivate anymore because of the fear factor. So the trust in the privacy of the information is really what's going to get it. And I can attest, I'm sworn for life. I've never seen a census form. I wouldn't even be able to see my own census form when I worked for the Census Bureau. I would be on the radar if all of a sudden so it's the privacy issue is most important, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to get to the school district officials. I want to turn to Michelle once real quick to define, there's this term you hear a lot in the census word, hard to count groups. And I think it's fair to say it's related to research that the Census Bureau does, analysis of census results, but also it does, before a census, research, essentially market research, trying to figure out what motivates people, what scares people before a census. The most recent research survey report found that fewer than 7 in 10 households are expected to say they're going to participate in the census, fewer than 7 in 10. And again, the point is, if you're thinking, that sounds good enough, that's about a majority. The point is to count every person living in the country. So that's not good enough to the Census Bureau standards, right?
Yeah, no, we really are focused, at least the partnership program, on the outreach to those hard-to-count populations. So who are the hard-to-count populations? Number one is renters. For some reason, renters have always presented challenges getting them to respond to the census. I don't know if it's because they don't have that invested tie to the community or they're highly mobile. Sometimes they live in buildings with locked gates or locked doors. We can't even gain access to their door to knock on it to collect the information. Renters have been historically challenging. African Americans, especially African American males, have historically been challenging to get to respond to census questionnaires. Seniors are another hard-to-count population. I think this decade, more so than ever before. For the first time in history, we're offering an online response option. And as you guys know, we are constantly warning our seniors, don't give out your information online, don't get scammed. We want to protect our seniors, which is really important, but at the same time, we need to educate our seniors so that they know how important it is to respond to the census, because the services that they rely on are dependent on us having an accurate count of where the need is. Another interesting hard-to-count population is college students. And with college students, the big problem there is, number one, the timing of the census. When we send out census questionnaires, it's right in the middle of spring break. It's right in the middle of March Madness basketball. It's right in the middle of midterms. But another big challenge with our college students is more often than not that when they do fill out their census questionnaire, they list their parents' address on their census form instead of their campus address where they live and stay most of the year. That's where we want them to be counted, where they're using the resources most of the year. Of course, our foreign-born population has always been a challenge. Every decade, we face challenges convincing our foreign-born population that it is safe and easy to respond to the census. And I would say this decade, those challenges are definitely heightened. The only thing we know as the Census Bureau to do is to reach out to the trusted voices in the community that can convey the message for us that the same law that requires us to collect this information every 10 years also protects the information that we collect for 72 years. And like they said, you can't get anything from the Census Bureau in anything but statistical format for 72 years. We're exempt from the Patriot Act. You know, the Supreme Court has continuously upheld the protections in place of our data, and even the President of the United States cannot get information from us in anything but statistical format, and there's examples of presidents throughout history who have tried. But probably the biggest undercounted or the biggest hard-to-count population that's really hit home for me this time is children. That 0 to 4 population is the largest undercounted age population, and the second largest undercounted age population is children aged 5 to 9. And a big problem with this is that the adults in the household, the mom, the dad, the grandma, oftentimes will fill out their census questionnaire, but they will leave their small child off the form. And we're a self-response survey. You send us the form back, we're just so glad we got it. We move on to the next household, you know? But the only thing I think about it like this, I have a small child. I have a little boy who's about to turn 4 years old. And I think of it like, if I don't include my boy on the 2020 census, I don't get a chance to correct that mistake until 2030. And by that time, my son will have already gone through elementary school, middle school, and will be starting high school, and there was never any funding allocated for him. You know, so those are some of the big hard-to-count populations that we're really focused on reaching out to.
Thank you, Michelle. I just do want to add a caveat. My reporting has shown, as part of the emails that were released as part of the Citizenship Question, there was an email exchange within the Trump administration's Justice Department that has raised questions about whether or not the Trump administration believes that any part of the Patriot Act could break confidentiality rules that would require the release of individually identifiable census information. That's something I'm still tracking. And there is, of course, a history thinking back specifically during World War II, when census information was released by the Census Bureau to other federal agencies, specifically for the incarceration of Japanese Americans, U.S. citizens of Japanese descent. That was information that didn't identify individuals, but a historian of the census, Margot Anderson, has done subsequent research. And then in the D.C. area, there was information released identifying individuals of Japanese descent as part of a national security investigation. This was all happening when Congress had passed the Second War Powers Act, which allowed for this sharing to happen, but there is precedent, and that is a fear you hear often in folks that I've interviewed in immigrant communities. I do want to go back to our school district officials, though. Trent, you talked earlier about strategies that Cleveland has done, and thinking very strategically about how have you incorporated some of these, what the Census Bureau calls hard-to-count groups, in terms of forming your strategy? Yeah, so before I answer that question, because it's going to lead into my answer, please. Is in regards to, as I reflect on the question around connecting the census information with families in poverty. One of the things that comes to mind, and my CEO and I were talking about months ago, is around when a lot of our families don't know the connection between what they can claim on the census compared to what they can claim on their taxes compared to what they can claim when they're identifying who's in their household when they're speaking with their landlord. And so that's huge. And the reason why it's huge is that because when I come knocking on your door from the community, they're reluctant to answer that door and reluctant to answer the questions that I pose. How many children do you have in your household? Because they don't know whether or not it's going to be used against them. Secondly, as I think about this issue around what the president would like to do and gaining access to that information,
Imagine for a moment if that occurred. Now I want you to think about the president thinking about this may not even be a real possibility, but here's what it does. It plants the seed of distrust. And that's all you need for something to germinate and build and grow. And so that's the layer that we have, the wall that we have to break down. And so part of our strategy, and at the core of everything that we do, regardless of whether it's in Cleveland or around the nation, the foundation of this work is not built on the infographics or the flyers that we build or the TV or even radio ads. The foundation of all this work is one thing: trust. Trust is our capital for change. You have that, you have connection. Then you use those other tools to reinforce the message. So a major part of our work in Cleveland is how do we make sure that we build that collective trust so that when we go to that front door and we knock, that person on the other side realizes that me who was sitting on the outside is here to help you and be a support for you. When we do that, everything else falls into place. When we don't focus on the little things, the big things don't occur. And all it takes is that one seed to germinate, to build that distrust. And like my father used to always tell me, son, when your mind wanders, your thoughts will betray you. And that's essentially what happens when you sow those seeds of distrust.
Thank you. Naomi, I want to turn to you. Earlier we were speaking about, you had mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, just a tension between as what you're doing at the school district level in the city of Philadelphia and the messaging you're trying to get across, and sometimes you feel that there's a disconnect with maybe what people are thinking nationally or at the federal government level. How do you navigate that tension when you're trying to build that trust, where the messaging you're trying to put out about the census may not necessarily match with what someone in the Trump administration may say?
Yeah, we face that a lot in Philadelphia. We're a sanctuary city, and so our mayor enjoys going one-to-one with our president on issues, which can sometimes be entertaining, but to your point, is difficult when you're trying to say, to Trent's point, trust this process that's coming from this person that's fighting with our mayor, please fill out this form that really needs to be filled out because it's important to the federal government. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking a lot about all of the other efforts we make with families and students around information. For example, we're in a huge push around immunizations, right? And even though we've put out tons and tons and tons of information, sent letters, reached out, we still have a core set of families that haven't done what needs to happen. And so I'm thinking about how do we translate the information into action, and what are the things that we need to do to kind of separate from the federal messaging, get really local and personal, and help translate from forms into actually doing what's needed, and that moment that needs to happen. I know we're trying things like others have said around setting up centers in the school so folks can do the online in the school with the teacher or others from the school. We have a lot of other support staff from the community. We have a lot of partnership organizations that will be helping in the schools do that. We're also going to engage children themselves, and hopefully get to some of the issues around young children not being counted, and trying to get children to message to their parents, please count me, right? I want to be counted. And so if the child themselves is indicating to the parent, hey, I want to be counted, count me, maybe that can help with some of that. But one note I did also write down that I think is going to be difficult for us. We're a poor city, and you mentioned somebody mentioned renters. Transience is a huge challenge, and we see it, with school enrollment, changes in enrollment and moving, and so just how do we make sure that we're reaching folks who tend to be transient, who move multiple times in a year, multiple times between censuses, and how are we making sure that we're using perhaps the schools and other places rather than the home as the primary place to engage and get folks to take the action we hope they will.
Thank you. Antonio, I wanted to ask you about, in Los Angeles, you have a school district with so many different languages being spoken by your student body. And I wonder, does that make it harder to think about how you develop that trust when you have to think through so many logistics?
That's one area where I feel Los Angeles is definitely at the forefront in terms of how we're organized with the U.S. Census Bureau, the state of California, Los Angeles County, City of Los Angeles Unified. There have been ongoing meetings and coordination meetings that have been in place that include NALEO, community-based organizations, civil rights groups, and we've had conversations about what that might look like. Currently, we just released or developed a public service announcement because we don't want to talk to families slide, right, about the census. So we put together a public service announcement that tells a story of how Census 2020 applies to Los Angeles Unified. We've made it available to 6 languages that are the predominant languages of the district because we see that will be an important factor as it relates to just building comprehension and understanding. But the coordinated efforts that we have within the cities, we have a group called Asians Advancing Justice. They've taken ownership to say, looking at the Asian Pacific Islander languages and figuring out, where it is that we can come in to tap into those silos and those gaps that exist for information. But needless to say, one piece that I have seen in this cycle around is the fact that the school site is the trusted entity, as Trent and as Naomi highlighted. And the beauty of our conference here today, when we're talking about school districts and about our schools are the center and the heart of the community. So as we think about the classrooms, as we think about the resources, as we think about the train-the-trainer opportunities, one piece that we're going to be committing as a school district is, facilities, right? We have multi-purpose rooms for training. How do we coordinate with NALEO and the city to ensure that our parent and family center staff are able to have those conversations? The other piece, too, is that the state of California and the county education offices have also created a unit with lessons for our students talking about the Census 101 that is applicable to all students. Because we know that the language barrier, and having grown as a child of immigrants and very proud about it, many of us become our parents' sort of first personal assistant, right? My mom and my dad, you're the interpreter, you help process banking at an elementary age. And so as we start to think about how all these agencies start to interconnect, we can identify gaps, we can identify language barriers, and really see where it is that we bring our assets to the conversation. And that's where, rather than speak about, who's not doing something, to really be more focused around how is it that we can move the work forward. But that the language piece is important, trust is important, and we see that in our school district. That's why, as we were highlighting a moment ago, for mixed status families, connecting to Know Your Rights immigration services has been the path that we have taken. Our engagement efforts, if you go to achieve.lausd.net/weareone, we have a resource guide that introduces Census 2020, Know Your Rights information with our legal partners that are doing the work, educational rights, housing rights, because all of these pieces are voids of information that our families don't have to be able to understand what it means to be civically engaged. It's not that they don't want to be civically engaged, is that they're really trying to figure out outside of their school who is the entity that they can trust.
So we have about a half hour left. What I want to do is transition into a Q&A session. And if anyone has any cards, please pass them to the end of the row and we'll collect them. You also can start lining up in front of the microphone if you'd like. But before we turn to the audience, I want to give our panelists a lightning round. In one sentence, what is something that you would advise not to do in terms of census outreach from your experience? One thing not to do in one sentence. And if you're ready, please raise your hand. We'll start. Debbie?
So my advice is, don't assume that if you count the parents, you've counted the kids. You could count every adult in your community and miss a lot of kids. You got to make sure they know they're supposed to count their young children.
Thank you, Debbie. Technically, that was 3 sentences, but we'll let that pass. Okay. But thank you for that advice. Next panelist, one sentence.
I think if any advice I could give you would be make every interaction count. Make every interaction count. between now and census.
Thank you. Jerry?
Mine would be to not underestimate the power of the count and the power of your voice in the census.
Thank you. Naomi?
And I'll join on that and say, don't underestimate the power of a child's voice and engaging them in the process.
Michelle?
I guess I have to second that. Don't underestimate the power of children, our youth. They are the best messengers to our parents. They are the ones that can get folks to respond to the census. So let's bring them into the process.
Lisa?
So I would say, make sure that we're providing our community accurate information. I think our intentions are always well-meaning, but our community has seen enough misinformation. Let's not be the ones to perpetuate that.
And Antonio?
I would say as educators, don't see the census as another checkmark item that I need to add to my queue during the school year as school leaders, as district leaders, to really see that as a foundational investment, not only in your children's resources, but in the programs that you can make available to your children. So don't say, I'm going to host this activity here, but think about how you embed that into all of the divisions that support your children from the morning all the way to your after-school programs.
Thank you. All right, so I have some written questions here. I guess everyone's a little mic shy. That's okay. We'll start with these questions, and please feel free to line up in the mic if you have a question that comes up. So first question here, where does door-to-door communication, the canvassing, the door knocking, come into play in the process? And then there's a second part of this question. What are some of the fieldwork barriers in the inner city versus in rural areas? So I think this question is referring to, when does the door knocking happen? Michelle?
So, okay, that's a great question. The timeline for the census, when does this all start? March 12th, we're going to start inviting every household to participate by either going online or picking up a phone. By April, every house that has not responded will receive a paper form in the mail, because as you guys know, there is still a digital divide in our nation. There are still plenty of people that don't have easy access to the internet. But by the end of April, by the beginning of May, I think it's May 12th, we'll actually start our non-response follow-up operation. So every household that has not responded, either by phone, online, or by paper, will get put into that non-response follow-up operation where we'll come knocking on their doors, and that will last through the summer. So I think we'll wrap that up around the end of August.
So it starts around early May.
Yeah, May through August.
Early May or August.
One thing, if I may, there is an early NERFood for college, around college campuses that starts a week, I think, prior to the broader non-response follow-up, because they want to get the college kids before they go home for the summer and all. So I believe the early non-response follow-up and knocking on the door occurs about a week prior to when they'll be coming to everyone else's household.
And let me give the room a pro tip. For someone who's been watching and covering census stuff for about 2 years now, there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to census strategy, and there are always exceptions. So if you start seeing census workers out in the field and it's not early May, you may be in remote Alaska, because in remote Alaska, door knocking starts in January, the day after Martin Luther King Day. That's historically the case in order to reach villages up there where it's really hard to get to during the spring months. There was a follow-up question, what are some of the fieldwork barriers for inner city versus rural? So what are some challenges for those census workers when they're visiting homes in the inner city versus in rural areas? Anyone want to take that real quick?
So I can tell you from personal experience, doing field work out in rural areas, trying to locate houses can often be difficult, especially if you're not familiar with the area. There are very large distances that you might have to travel from one house to the next. And then in the cities, again, we're faced with challenges of locked gates, of locked access to buildings. We have to reach out to the landlords and the property managers, gain their trust so that we can actually gain access to knock on the doors and to leave notes on households. So there are specific challenges to both rural and city fieldwork.
And also, Hansi, in urban areas, there's a problem, and the Census Bureau has developed operations to address hidden households. So you can, where there are multiple families living in one unit, or illegal, if you will, housing, but you kind of see a dish thing, satellite coming out of the garage. There's not a car in there, So hidden households is another challenge of inner city and urban areas, and particularly in New York.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to our audience questions before I go to more written questions. Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a question for the Urban League and Leo and the school district folks, I think more specifically. Who are your most effective partners at the local level, and what makes those partnerships effective in this work?
Thank you. Anyone want to take that first?
I can
Lisa?
try to take it. So some of our most effective partners that we've seen, so part of the NALEO acronym is the National Association of Latino Elected Officials. A huge portion of our membership are school board members. Our school board members across the country have really championed a lot of this work. So we started off in 2018 when we gave them all template resolutions to go and pass at their school districts. We did the same thing for city council members. These folks have been true champions of the work. I think now we're moving into the implementation of the work and actually taking examples of what LAUSD is doing and a couple of other school districts that we've been working with. But truly, when you look at access and accessing trusted messengers, school board members have been really key for us. In addition to that, it's been a lot of the national partners. So we are part of a national partnership structure, which a lot of us are part of. So we talk all the time. What that helps us do is really leverage our resources and tap into communities where we overlap, right? So for Latino communities, we have lots of communities that overlap with API, African American, a lot of Caribbean immigrants, et cetera, and then children, very important. So what that allows us to do is not just go in the community and say, oh, we don't really handle that. It's to say, let me pull in all my partners to make sure that we can address your question and address your issues. So the national structure and what we've developed is super helpful. But again, our school board members have really championed the work. A lot of teachers, superintendents, and school administrators who have really kind of dedicated their time to do this.
And thank you, Michael, for that question. That's a tough one, especially now with all of the distrust. The Citizenship Question has really made our work very difficult, because we have to be truth tellers. So, there's a lot of folks who say, we trust you guys, but we don't know what those other folk are going to do. And it's just made our job, don't you think, very difficult. So because of the National Urban League's 90 affiliate network spread across 36 states, and empowering about 2 million people a day, we're trying to meet people where they are. We have to go into the household. We have to talk one-on-one with people. That's why this is so good, because this is a very different and strange environment. And so we're putting our credibility and our trust in the people who serve these families and communities each and every day. So our affiliate network is really going to be key to getting the word out on a one-on-one basis.
All right, I want to turn to our audience question. Let me just get this one written question in here. I thought education funding is based off of annual enrollment provided by a district. It was stated that education funding is based off of the census. What is correct? Yes, Debbie.
So 2 different pieces of the process of dividing up the money. The federal census data, which counts 5 to 18-year-olds, is used for Title I money to get into the district, and the 3 to 21-year-old data is used for the special education money to get in the district. Once the money gets into the district, the other source of data, that count data, is used to allocate the money to schools within the district. But if you want to grow your funding pie for what gets in your district, you got to pay attention to the census.
And we're going to squeeze one more in here. Has Head Start been considered to collect data from 0 to 3 and 3 to 5-year-olds? Debbie?
So the first thing to know is only the census collects the data. The Census Bureau does get information from lots of agencies to help them figure out where to go count people, but you can't count people in Head Start. You can't count people in the schools. I'm not sure if the Head Start programs are sharing information about where their parents live. the Head Start programs are working to get information out to parents to make sure that they respond to the census and count their young children. And so are the CAP programs, which is community, I forget what the A is programs, where a lot of the Head Start programs are located. So we are working closely with them, but they don't do the count. The count itself is in the Bureau.
And we were fortunate to have a workshop with Head Start administrators in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, early in the summer. And we matched Head Start administrators with state elected officials. And we had a workshop to educate Head Start members on the importance. We had Black clergy there too, so we had clergy folk, very much trusted voices, talk with Head Start administrators about how they can help educate the parents of kids in Head Start to get a good count. So that was revealing, actually.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask our question askers, we're going to take 3 questions at once, and then we'll get the answers that way. We're going to make sure everyone gets to ask their question. So please.
I have 2 questions. My name is Danielle Ford. I'm a school board member in Clark County. And my first question is, I can imagine that if I was a parent here illegally, that it would be really scary if somebody showed up at my door. And if I was in the habit of not opening my door for that reason. So I guess my question is, how do I, as a school board member, tell the parents what they can do to differentiate the difference between somebody with the census and somebody who might not be? And is there any times when a different agency might lie or pretend or make themselves look like a census member to try to get that information? So is there a phrase that they can ask or any ID that they can ask for? And then my second question, if a district has an idea for some messaging or marketing to the families and the kids, is there a place where we can get support and resources, either have that made or get the funding for it? So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, I think we can quickly answer those. Michelle?
Yeah, just quickly on the how to identify a census worker who comes to your door. Before I even address that, the number one best way to avoid that is to simply self-respond to the census. Take 10 minutes to answer the questions online or pick up the phone and call to avoid having someone come out to your house and knocking on your door in the first place. But you can identify a census worker. Every census worker will have a ID badge, a federal badge. They will be carrying a bag. They will have a laptop or an iPad that they are conducting the work on.
And iPhones, I think they're using.
Or iPhones, yeah, I apologize. And all census workers are trained to be very understanding of anybody that wants to send them away so they can verify their identity. They will give you their phone number and ask you to call them, so they don't have to come back on your property. But honestly, you mentioned, are there going to be people that are impersonating census workers? And we're aware this happens every 10 years. I think that the best thing we can do is educate folks on what we are asking on the census and what we aren't asking. We will never ask for your full social security number or your mother's maiden name or a donation of any kind or any kind of political affiliation. This goes with protecting our seniors as well. If anybody were to ask these types of questions, that needs to be a red flag, that this is not legit. The questions that we do ask are very, very basic. Name, age, race, ethnicity. Do you own or rent your house? How many people live in your home? How is each person related to each other? And then we do ask for a phone number just so that we don't have to come knock on your door if there's any questions. But I think educating folks are the best, educating what we won't ask is probably the best way to protect folks.
And I'll quickly add, yes, Lisa?
Sorry, can I just briefly add? So if there are folks who they just don't know, they're wondering, is this person knocking? Who are they? We do have elections around the same time, so there'll be canvassers. You can have them call our hotline, 877 and Censo. Our staff is fully trained to see, the badge, the bag, all of that stuff, all of the directives that the Census Bureau will have, our staff will have with them. If there is an impersonator, We also are set up to work closely with the Lawyers Committee, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, to make sure that we're flagging that and that we're able to see where that's happening. So I would say, if nothing else, and you say they talked about a lot of different things, I don't remember a whole lot, 877 El Censo, give that to your folks, to the parents, and they can call us for general information or to report.
What was that number again?
877 El Censo, and I'm sorry because I don't know it numerically right now because I'm used to just doing press with it, but I believe that we're providing the slides, right? We're providing, and then the slides, it has the actual numeric.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, let's go to our next question at the mic.
All right, so hi, my name is.
I still had that second question about the resources.
Okay.
Your question was about, are there any resources for educators to use?
No, like if say the district wanted to do we have 328,000 students in our district. So if we wanted to do some marketing campaign or give stickers or something, is there resources that we can get, whether that's just funding itself for the project or have it made through the company, like specifically for what we wanted to do?
Okay.
If money's an issue, think about ways that whenever your families call the school, the recorded message that when they're waiting when they're on hold can be about the message. So think about ways that you can promote to families. That's what we're going to be looking into. Like, so when people call our number, they're on hold, and say, are you aware that the census application cycle is currently open? Giving some insights around that end. Also, philanthropy is also very involved. So think about what are your regional foundations. Our campaign initially started with foundation dollars. We don't have categorical dollars that would support civic engagement efforts like this. So philanthropy was essentially the entity that really got it going. You just have to go in and sell your program. We hired our own graphic designer. We started to work with our different partners to capture, because a lot of the data will be overwhelming and the information will be overwhelming for your families. So you as a school district can come in and create your own sample. If you go to our We Are One website, you'll be able to see our resource guide. And the resource guide took a lot of information and we packaged it in a very simple way by using student voice. The students were able to tell us what was too much, what was missing, and we developed that resource with our students.
Okay.
But just wait real quick, if you will, and I think, Michelle, you might be going to mention this, but the Census Bureau has a fantastic website that just launched their Statistics in Schools website for the 2020 census. They have lesson plans, curriculum, activity books from pre-K to the 12th grade. You can go up there and download all of these materials that were developed by teachers and educators like yourself. And there's a lot of things you can get free of charge right there on the Statistics in Schools website. And I believe they may have contracted with Scholastic to develop it. So things are they're very well done, and I think maps, geography, games, videos, teachers talking to teachers on there. I would suggest you go to their Statistics in Schools.
And we're happy to talk to you after too for other resources. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
other place I would encourage you to look is we manage a website called countallkids.org, and we did all this message research. We're in the process of developing posters and flyers that use that research. And so if you go on there and sign up for the campaign, as those materials become available, you'll get an email and you'll be able to download materials specifically about counting kids based on our message research.
Okay, let's go to our next question to Mike. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi again. My name is Byron Gladden with Guilford County Schools. I wanted to ask the question about talking points when you're dealing with populations, particularly populations of color, that are aware of the history of the census and the role that we played in it, going back to 1790 and the Three-Fifths Compromise, which did not change for almost 80 years with the 14th Amendment, and looking at how the census was manipulated in the early 1940s as relates to identifying Japanese ancestry for internment camps. And what gentrification has done to our community. So when you look at building all this information, because earlier Ms. Ellison spoke to renters, and as a renter now homeowner, looking at the discrimination, renters are more tailored to the community because they are fighting to pay low rent in very bad parts of the neighborhood that have been redlined and just systemically oppressed. And so trying to have that relationship in that community is challenging. It's not they don't want to be tailored, but we have to acknowledge as part of gathering census data that we are in a housing crisis. classes, and to where you find more friendlier neighborhoods in more affluent areas and not in high poverty, low income areas and high crime. And they necessarily don't want to be there because of systemic racism and overcharging for mortgages and things like that. People of color have been redlined to those communities that are built around distrust. And so if you can speak to that, because the comments bothered me earlier, like I don't know why renters are not, tethered to the community. They're fighting to pay their rent every month, and that's why no one's at the door. I know I work 3 jobs. So that's why, as an African-American male, I miss the census at times because I am working to pay rent, and that wasn't uplifting. I wanted to correct that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we turn to the panelists, I want to make sure we get all our questions in.
Sure,
So
sure.
let's get one more question in here at the mic.
Well, this might fit with his question somewhat. There has been no conversation, I think I may have missed some, about the homeless population, which is especially important in this setting where a lot of children are sleeping on couches as homeless. So how do you have any methods in place to reach homelessness?
Okay.
So I'll talk about that. When you talk about the homeless, we kind of have 2 populations to think about. The first population is the one you're talking about, which I think of as the doubled up or the couch surfing. We know that those kids get missed a lot, and it's really important to put out specific messages that say, count all children in your household, even if they're there temporarily, if they don't have another permanent residence. But we can also tell families, if you think you weren't counted, you can make sure you get counted by going online and filling out a form for yourself and your child, and make sure you include everyone in the household so that they know you really know that household. They'll take out the double counts. And the Census Bureau has said that's the right way to get counted if you're not sure your own, the people you're living with count you, and we're putting out a fact sheet soon about that. The other group of homeless are people who live in what's called group quarters, so, shelters, transitional housing, people who patronize, soup kitchens and food banks, and there's a whole separate process for counting them called group quarters, where they go one night to one and one night to another, and they try and count everybody. I've had conversations with Central Census Bureau staff, and people who are in that situation, if they're afraid they're not counted, the best way to make sure they're counted is to go to their shelter administrator and ask them to make sure they include them in the count. But it's a very hard population to count, there's no question.
Yeah, part of our strategy in Cleveland is that we made that part of our work where we'll actually have people on those sites, including the food bank, because that's where they're at. And that was one thing that we had not touched on originally in our initial planning stages, and then the conversation emerged that wherever our families are at, wherever they touch is where we need to be at.
Let's go back to that earlier question we had at the mic. If I can summarize it correctly, I think how do you, as folks trying to encourage people to participate in the census, how do you address cynicism, and how do you address folks who are really concerned and feel that there can't be any trust that could be developed given past historical events?
Thank you. That is correct.
Thank you. Does anyone have any strategies and experience to speak to that?
So, I tell you, I understand every word you said. I just want to say yes. And we're out there. And we have heard people say, I participated. Y'all came to my apartment 10 years ago. And you beat me down. You told me what's gonna happen. We were at a new hospital, we're gonna get new roads. And guess what? My apartment is now $1 million condo. So gentrification has really impacted. It is a story, I'm telling you. It's a tough story to say, it's going to, you need to be counted, because the dollars follow the count, not the need. So one of the things I want to share with you is that in 2015, 37 states forfeited a measurable amount of funding for each person missed in the 2010 census. So within those 37 states, the average amount of money missed that each state lost because of folks not participating in the census ranged from actually $533 in Utah to up to $2,309 in Vermont. So the average loss per person times 10 in our community is about $1,091. And those dollars, so that's for each person over each year, $1,000 lost per person. So you multiply that by a household, you're talking about a lot of money. And those programs support Head Start. They support free lunch programs. They support Pell Grants. How many of us have applied for a Pell, used Pell? Okay, there you go. All right. TANF, WIC, Section 8, all those programs. So wherever it is, this is affordable. Wherever they are, wherever we are, those programs are going to benefit us. And that's what we have to convey. There is a dollar amount right on our forehead. So you can choose to be, to deprive your community of needed funds or, make it happen and be counted.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that.
I will also say this, as Lizette talked about the national partners, and we're often called the census hubs on different communities that are undercounted. National philanthropies have funded all of us to do message research to try and figure out what messages are most persuasive. And the Funders Committee for Civic Participation has a census website, and one of their pages just has all of the webinars and slide decks reporting what messages worked and what didn't for different communities. So it's worth going to that website and looking at the research that was done by Color of Change, which looked at the Black community. The NALEO research is up there. My research on counting young children is there. You can go, and there's research on reaching Arab American community, on reaching tribal communities. It is worth going and looking if you have a particular constituency in a particular community to see what our message research found was most persuasive. In some communities, a resistance message is very persuasive. This is how we fight back. This is how we make sure we're counted. This is how we make sure we're not invisible. But it's worth looking at those slides to figure out what messages resonated most in your community.
All right, Lizette?
The site is the Funders Committee for Civic Participation. I don't know the actual URL. I always find it by Googling Funders Committee Civic Participation Census. And then they have a lot of resources. You then have to find the messaging page.
Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly address some of the, for lack of a better term, cynicism that we're seeing specifically with Latino millennials in our research. The sense of, does my vote even count? Does my count, right? And so, and this kind of other thing that keeps on coming up, and it'll come up in Latino communities, there is a question around Hispanic origin on the census. What we've been getting more so in a lot of our research is that another way to target me now that the citizenship question won't be on? And so a lot of the kind of history telling that we're having to do is the fact that the Hispanic origin question was added as a result of the civil rights fight to make sure that we were implementing key civil rights policies for Hispanics or Latinos. And so that's another key piece, that's another uphill battle that we'll have. Because across the board, that's what we've been hearing. Oh, yes, there's a race question, but why also a Hispanic origin question, right? And so that's going to be our next hurdle. We're starting to, now that the citizenship question will no longer be on, we're going into our second iteration of research to see what was the impact. We're hoping to release something by January so that we can look at what are some messages that work, that don't work. We're seeing that this message of feeling empowered through making yourself count is something that's starting to resonate now, specifically for the Latino community, because folks saw this battle play out in the media so much, and because they've kind of gotten to a point where they feel a little helpless, so let's do something, let's act, let's appear, let's show up, let's be heard. And so we're seeing some of that, but again, we have to be, just to reiterate what Jerry mentioned, we have to be the storytellers of our community and make sure that they understand that count is power through all these various ways, but it is kind of one of the only ways that we have a way to show our power, especially with undocumented communities that feel like they're under attack. Then let's fight back and make yourself count.
And with that, let us thank our panelists today for joining us. Thank you for joining us. I know there are a lot more questions that people have. If I can ask the panelists to stay on the stage for anyone to come up one-on-one to ask more questions. Thank you for joining us today for the town hall, and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.
You did awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.